My name is Daniel Ogbaharya, and I am the Chair of Public Policy and Social Change in the Ph.D. program in Interdisciplinary Studies here at Union Institute and University. I also teach in the program. Among others, I teach environmental justice. In today's presentation on the occasion of the upcoming Earth Day, I would like to go over a complex topic, environmental justice, and the environmental justice movement. And there are many perspectives, and I would like to go over how it has been understood in the context of the United States and the global North, as opposed to the global South in places like Africa, Latin America, and Asia, and then give some examples along the way, and finally end with some sort of call to action, some ideas of what we can do. After all, environmental justice movement is about direct action, about taking direct action. So let's begin. What is environmental justice? Again, it means many different things to many people, but essentially, it is about the fact that environmental pollution affects disproportionately, harms disproportionately people of color, people who live in low-income neighborhoods, indigenous groups, and rural communities, much more than it does to established groups, privileged groups, who can, as they say, exercise, some power in terms of saying, not in my backyard. So environmental pollution has, to quote one of the intellectual forebearers, sociologist Dr. Robert Bollard, environmental pollution has color, right? Normally we think of environmental issues like recycling and sustainability, climate change, as affecting us all, which is correct. Environmental problems, by definition, are collective problems. What we do to our air, to our water, to our rivers, we all will pay a price. But unfortunately, the reality is that some groups, because of their color, because of their race, because of their socioeconomic status, and because of where they live, they are subject to greatest harm when it comes to exposure to harmful environmental substances, whether this is the fact that most of our, for example, environmental waste and chemical processing facilities are placed in neighborhoods that people of color live, in African Americans and Hispanic and even in indigenous areas, a famous example being the case of the uranium mining in native lands that have brought so much health impacts. So what we are saying is that the unfair exposure of economically disadvantaged groups, to environmental pollution. So environmental pollution is not colorblind. It also means that these groups also have no access or unequal access to green environmental spaces, to access to national parks, for example, or access to gardening, or access to nutritious food or farmers market, right? it's this unequal access. Not only that, unequal protection, right? They are not being properly and proportionally and fairly being protected from environmental pollution, but they also don't have positive access uh, or equal access to green environmental spaces. So in terms of the origins of the environmental social justice movement, and it's a social justice movement, because it is focused on systemic discrimination in environmental protection. It emerged in the 1980s in the United States, specifically in the southern part of the United States, in places like Warren County, North Carolina, where people, protested, directly acted to stop the placing of dumping sites or hazardous waste facilities in their communities, right? So environmental justice is about direct action, because these communities don't have the say, they don't have a voice in the decision making vis-a-vis what to do with with the environment. So they have to take direct action, and they took direct action, and a lot of people were arrested. But ultimately, Congress authorized investigation that led to a landmark report called the Siting of Hazardous Waste Landfills and Their Correlation with Racial and Economic Status of Surrounding Communities. This was an investigation and a report published by the General Accounting Office, the US Government General Accounting Office. And the findings were startling, because the findings was that these very detrimental, the detrimental processing facilities, landfills, were being, placed in these communities, and these communities were being targeted because of their race, the primary factor, and because of their socioeconomic status, and because they don't have the political clout to say not in my backyard. Now, 30 years later, we still have a similar problem. There was a study done by researchers at the University of Michigan, and they looked at this over a 30-year period of time, and they found a consistent pattern over a 30-year period of placing hazardous waste facilities in neighborhoods where poor people and people of color live, right? And they found that the primary reason is their race. These people are being targeted, and these very harmful facilities are being placed in these areas precisely because they don't have the economic or political clout to exercise not in my backyard. So although we have made some progress in some areas, this remains a big issue, the unequal and unfair treatment. So now moving on to how environmental justice is understood more globally. It is about unfair treatment. It's about lack of voice in terms of environmental decision making. It is the exclusion of people from decisions about what to do with their land, what to do with their livelihoods and with their well-being. It is also a different conception of the relationship between nature and people, whose rights have to come first, or is that a way to a proper way to conceive the relationship between to conceptualize the relationship between nature and people, right? Is it more of a harmonious relationship, or we are going to prioritize the rights of nature, the right of wildlife, for example, or the rights of endangered species like the cheetah, for example, over the rights of people who live in and around the national parks, these places that we have set aside, these lands, this wilderness that we have set aside for the protection of these increasingly endangered wildlife. But at the same time, are we putting the rights of this wildlife, like cheetah, over and above the well-being and the livelihood of people who live in these communities, right? So a famous example could be the Maasai, rural, pastoralists in East Africa, in Kenya and Tanzania, who are very, very mobile for their economic livelihood, and but the nature of enclosures and parks and wilderness means that they are restricted in their livelihoods. So again, ultimately, who makes decisions about what to do with these natural resources? Who make decisions about what type of economic development we should have? Now, there are ways where people can be environmental conservationists and also do well economically. There are ways to sort of marry poverty reduction or economic development with conservation. In other words, the Maasai can be empowered to benefit from things like ecotourism, like economically and otherwise. But there is a tendency, and that's what environmental justice focuses on. There is a tendency for northern environmental conservation groups to come in and say that the parks and the wildlife have to take priority. So what can we do in terms of what is to be done, call for action, if you like? And there is no better way. We are now commemorating the Earth Day. What can we do? Well, first of all, we have to expand our horizon of what we mean by environmental sustainability, right? Environmental sustainability is beyond just recycling or climate change. We have to be conscious of the fact that even the kind of environmental remedies we are doing, like recycling, how that is impacting, right? Disproportionately and negatively impacting disadvantaged groups around the world. So, for example, when we recycle and we clean up our air and our environment here in the global north, what it means that we are offshoring and outsourcing this toxic environmental waste to other countries and to where people with very little economic choice have to live with the burning of chemicals of these and processing facilities and basically landfills, and with detrimental effects on their health and on their lives. Higher rates of cancers. We have places in the United States, for example, where like in the South, called cancer alleys, because people are disproportionately suffering from these health effects because of exposure disproportionately from environmental pollution. So that is, we have to expand our horizon and think about inequities that result from not only the unfair treatment and exposure to environmental pollution, but also the actions, the environmental policies we take sometimes will have these detrimental and unequal effects as well. Another one is that, environmental justice is about direct action, the environmental justice social movement, because these groups and these communities have very little representation and very little voice around the table of making decisions about the environment. So in terms of helping them organize, people could go into environmental justice advocacy, and as the old guard, people who actually led this in the 80s, are at the sunset of their career. We need more young people to go into environmental advocacy, and maybe consider a career, for example, in environmental law, because environmental litigation and proving that these communities are being targeted, primarily because of their race, and because of their economic status, and because of their position in society. Then there is a lot that one can contribute through environmental litigation and going into environmental law. That could be one other area. But ultimately, we need to think about that environmental justice is something that has to be part of the discussion when we talk about things like climate change and sustainability. Thank you.